Rain lashed against the small wooden platform of the Clearwater Junction train station as Rose Whitfield clutched her soaked letter tighter, the ink now bleeding across the page. April 1875 was proving to be crueler than any spring had a right to be. 3 days she had waited, her trunk of belongings stacked beside her, hope dwindling with each passing train that didn't bring her intended husband. Rose had left everything behind in Boston: her position as a schoolteacher, her tiny rented room, and the whispers that followed a 24-year-old unmarried woman. The advertisement had seemed like Providence. Rancher seeks educated bride, good home promised, passage paid. The letters that followed had been brief but promising. Mr. Thomas Peterson had described his cattle ranch outside Clearwater, Wyoming territory, and assured her he would meet her train on Tuesday. Tuesday had come and gone. So had Wednesday. Now Thursday's sky wept as mercilessly as Rose refused to. "You'll catch your death standing out here," called the station master for the 4th time that day. His lined face showed genuine concern as he gestured toward the small station house. "At least come inside, Miss Whitfield." "He might come," Rose answered automatically, though her voice lacked the conviction it had held on the first day. "Perhaps there was trouble with the herd or the roads are washed out." The station master shook his head but said nothing more. They both knew what happened sometimes with mail-order brides. Men changed their minds, or worse, they'd never meant to marry in the first place. As the afternoon light began to fade, Rose finally acknowledged the truth. He wasn't coming. She was alone, nearly penniless, 2,000 miles from the only home she'd ever known. She would have to find work in town if there was any to be had for a woman alone. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the drumming rain. Rose told herself not to hope as she peered through the downpour. A horse and rider materialized from the mist, a tall figure astride a chestnut stallion. The rider pulled up short at the station, dismounting in one fluid motion. Water streamed from his wide-brimmed hat as he looked around the platform. His eyes found Rose, standing alone with her trunk, and something in his expression shifted. He wasn't Thomas Peterson. This man was younger, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. His shoulders were broad beneath his rain-slicked duster. "Miss Whitfield?" he asked, his voice deep and rough-edged. Rose's chin lifted. "Yes, and you are Quinn Prescott." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled damply at his temples. "I'm here on behalf of Thomas Peterson." Rose felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by wariness. "Is Mr. Peterson unwell? I've been waiting since Tuesday." The man Quinn looked uncomfortable. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, couldn't quite meet hers. "I'm afraid there's been a situation, madam." "Thomas Peterson passed away 3 weeks ago. Influenza took him quick." The news hit Rose like a physical blow. Dead. The man she'd been corresponding with for 6 months, whose cautious letters had given her hope for a new beginning, was gone. "I see," she managed, though her voice wavered. "And no one thought to send word." "The telegram was sent," Quinn said, "but it appears it never reached you." "I'm sorry, Miss Whitfield. When we realized you might still be coming, I rode out as soon as I could." Rose swallowed hard. "I appreciate your coming to inform me, Mr. Prescott. If you could direct me to a respectable boarding house, I'll make arrangements to return east." Quinn Prescott looked at her, really looked at her then, taking in her sodden dress, her pale face, and the small trunk containing everything she owned in the world. His expression softened. "You've waited long enough," he said quietly. "Let's get you somewhere warm and dry first. We can figure out the rest after." Before Rose could respond, Quinn turned toward the station master. "Jim, can you watch Miss Whitfield's trunk until morning? I'll send a wagon for it." The older man nodded. "Course, Quinn, you taking her to Martha's place?" "For now," Quinn confirmed, then turned back to Rose. "Martha Holloway runs a clean boarding house in town. She'll have a hot meal and dry clothes for you." Rose hesitated. Going anywhere with a stranger wasn't what a proper Boston lady would do, but she wasn't in Boston anymore, and the thought of a warm meal and dry clothes was too tempting to resist. "Thank you," she said finally. "That would be most welcome." Quinn nodded once, then guided her toward his horse. Ever ridden astride, Miss Whitfield? I haven't, Rose admitted. No time like the present, Quinn said, the faintest trace of a smile touching his lips. I'll help you up first, then mount behind you. Before she could protest, his large hands circled her waist, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. Rose found herself seated sideways on the horse, her sodden skirts making the whole affair rather ungraceful. Quinn swung up behind her with practiced ease. Hold tight to the saddle horn, he instructed, one arm coming around her waist to steady her as he took the reins in his other hand. It's not far to town. The warmth of him at her back was shocking after days of cold rain. Rose felt herself trembling, though whether from cold or proximity to this stranger, she couldn't say. The horse moved forward and she gripped the saddle horn tightly, acutely aware of Quinn Prescott's chest against her shoulder, his breath warm near her ear. The town of Clearwater came into view within minutes, a single muddy street, lined with wooden buildings. Quinn guided the horse to a two-story clapboard structure set back from the main road, with a small sign reading Holloway Boarding House swinging from the porch. A plump woman with steel gray hair opened the door before Quinn could even dismount. Quinn Prescott, what in heaven's name? Her eyes fell on Rose, and her expression immediately softened. Oh, you poor dear. Is this her then, Thomas's intended? Yes, madam, Quinn said, helping Rose down from the horse. Miss Rose Whitfield, she's been waiting at the station for days. Land's sakes, come in, come in. Martha Holloway ushered Rose inside, clucking with concern. You're soaked through, Quinn, stable that horse and come inside. I've got stew on the stove, and this girl needs to get warm before she catches her death. The boarding house was blessedly warm, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth of a small parlor. Martha whisked Rose upstairs to a tiny but clean bedroom, providing a cotton nightgown and a woolen wrapper. Change out of those wet things, she instructed. I'll have hot tea waiting downstairs. Rose was too exhausted to argue. She peeled off her sodden traveling suit, dried herself with the provided towel, and gratefully donned the borrowed nightgown and wrapper. The garments were slightly too large but warm and dry. She attempted to tidy her hair, but the damp curls defied her efforts. When she descended the stairs, she found Quinn Prescott seated at a round table in the dining room, his hat on the sideboard and a steaming mug in his hands. He stood when she entered, something like appreciation flickering in his eyes before he quickly masked it. Miss Whitfield, he said with a nod, you look better. Dry clothes make all the difference, Rose said, taking the seat Martha indicated. A bowl of fragrant stew and a mug of tea were placed before her. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, you're very kind. Nonsense, the older woman said, though she looked pleased. Any friend of Quinn's is welcome here. Rose glanced at Quinn, wondering at the relationship between them, but she was too hungry to ponder it for long. The stew was delicious chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth that warmed her from the inside out. Now, Martha said when Rose had eaten half her bowl, what's to be done? Poor Thomas's passing was a shock to us all, such a good man. Rose set down her spoon. I confess I don't know. I had planned to marry Mr. Peterson and begin a new life here now. She trailed off, the enormity of her situation hitting her anew. You can stay here as long as you need, Martha assured her. Though board will have to be paid eventually. Rose nodded. I understand. I'll need to find employment. I was a school teacher in Boston. Perhaps we don't have a school, Quinn interrupted. His voice was matter of fact, not unkind. Nearest one's in Riverton, 30 miles east. Oh, Rose felt her hopes sinking. Well, I'm also experienced in bookkeeping. My father was an accountant and he taught me before he passed. Quinn's eyes sharpened with interest. Is that so? He seemed to consider something. The ranch Thomas left behind needs managing. His affairs are in a state. His nephew's coming from back east to take over eventually, but it'll be months yet. Rose looked at him curiously. You're not the heir. Quinn shook his head. Just the foreman, been running things since Thomas took ill. Martha made a disapproving noise. Running yourself ragged is what you've been doing. That ranch is too much for one man to manage alone. Quinn ignored the older woman's comment, his eyes on Rose. I could use someone with a head for figures to help straighten out the ledgers, and the hands need feeding. It'd be temporary, mind, just until the nephew arrives, but it would give you time to decide what comes next. Comes with room and board. Rose hesitated. It wasn't what she had planned, working as an employee rather than coming as a wife, but it was an opportunity and she had precious few of those. You don't even know if I'm qualified, she pointed out. A small smile tugged at Quinn's lips. Thomas wouldn't have chosen an unqualified woman for his bride. He was the most practical man I ever knew. It's settled then, Martha declared before Rose could respond. Quinn, you'll come fetch her tomorrow after she's had a proper rest. The poor girl's been standing in the rain for days. Quinn nodded, rising from his chair. I'll be by at noon with the wagon for your trunk. His eyes met Rose's. If that suits you, Miss Whitfield. Rose knew she should consider more carefully, should perhaps look for other options. But the exhaustion of the past days weighed heavily, and the prospect of a position and purpose, however temporary, was too appealing to refuse. That suits me very well, Mr. Prescott, she said, and please call me Rose. His expression warmed slightly. Rose, then. And I'm Quinn to most folks around here. He retrieved his hat from the sideboard. Rest well. The ranch is a different world from Boston. After he left, Martha showed Rose back to her room, providing a proper nightgown and promising breakfast in the morning. Left alone, Rose sat on the edge of the narrow bed, contemplating the swift turn her life had taken. She had come west to marry a man she'd never met, only to find him dead. Now she was accepting a position from his foreman, another man she barely knew. It was reckless, perhaps even foolish. And yet, as she slipped between the clean sheets, Rose felt something she hadn't expected. A flicker of anticipation for whatever tomorrow might bring. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous days of rain had been a dream. Rose woke to sunlight streaming through the small window of her boarding house room. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of yesterday crashed back the news of Thomas Peterson's death, Quinn Prescott's unexpected offer, her acceptance of a position at a ranch she'd never seen. Rose dressed in her one remaining clean outfit, a simple blue cotton day dress that had mercifully remained dry in her trunk, and went downstairs to find Martha Holloway setting out plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. There you are, dear. Sleep well, Martha asked, pouring coffee into a thick mug. Better than I have in days, Rose admitted. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Holloway. Martha, please. Mrs. Holloway makes me sound like my mother-in-law, God rest her soul. The older woman sat across from Rose. Now, before Quinn arrives, there are things you should know. Rose paused with her coffee halfway to her lips. What sort of things? About the Peterson ranch. Martha buttered a biscuit with decisive strokes. It's one of the biggest spreads in the territory, 3,000 acres and nearly 1,000 head of cattle. Thomas built it from nothing over 20 years. Meant to leave it to his son, but the boy died of fever same time as his mother back in '68. How terrible, Rose murmured. Martha nodded. Thomas was never the same after, threw himself into building the ranch bigger, better. Kept to himself mostly. That's why it surprised us all when he started corresponding with you. She paused. It gave folks hope that Thomas was finally looking toward the future again. Rose felt a pang of sadness for the man she'd never meet. His letters, though brief, had shown intelligence and decency. And Quinn, how does he fit into all this? Martha's expression softened. Quinn showed up about 6 years ago, didn't say much about where he came from, but he knew cattle and wasn't afraid of hard work. Thomas saw something in him, promoted him to foreman within a year. He's been running the place since Thomas took ill and by all accounts doing a fine job of it, he seems. Capable, Rose said carefully. Martha's eyes twinkled. He's that, all right. Handsome too, though he doesn't seem to notice the way half the girls in the county moon over him. She leaned closer. Between us, I think he's carrying something heavy from his past. Man like that, with his looks and position, should have a wife and children by now. Before Rose could respond to this surprisingly personal observation, the sound of wagon wheels outside announced Quinn's arrival. Martha rose, gathering the breakfast dishes. Just thought you should know what you're walking into. The ranch is a good place, but it's isolated. 5 hands besides Quinn, all decent men but rough around the edges. I appreciate the information, Rose said, smoothing her skirts as she stood. "I've taught rooms full of unruly boys. I believe I can manage a few ranch hands." Martha's laugh followed her to the door. "I believe you can at that, Miss Rose Whitfield." Quinn Prescott stood beside a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. He'd exchanged yesterday's rain-soaked duster for a clean canvas coat, and his dark hair was neatly combed beneath his hat. He looked every inch the competent ranch foreman as he loaded Rose's trunk into the wagon bed. "Morning," he said with a nod. "Weather's cleared up nice." "Yes, it has," Rose agreed, accepting his hand to climb onto the wagon seat. "Thank you for coming to collect me." "Promised I would," Quinn said simply, as if the idea of breaking his word had never occurred to him. He settled beside her, taking up the reins. "It's about an hour's drive to the ranch. Roads might still be muddy in spots." They set off down Clearwater's main street, drawing curious glances from the few people out and about. Rose sat straight-backed beside Quinn, acutely aware that her arrival with the Peterson ranch foreman would fuel gossip. A woman alone in the West was always subject to speculation, she knew. "You haven't asked about the terms of employment," Quinn observed as they left the town behind. "I assumed we would discuss that upon arrival," Rose replied, "but I'm happy to address it now if you prefer." Quinn kept his eyes on the road. $20 a month plus room and board. "You'll keep the books, help with correspondence, and oversee the house. Meals for the hands, laundry, that sort of thing," Rose considered. The salary was less than she'd earned as a teacher, but with no expenses for lodging or food, she could save most of it. "That seems fair." "How long do you anticipate the position lasting?" Thomas's nephew is expected by fall. After that, Quinn shrugged. "That'll be his decision, I see." Rose watched the landscape unfold before them, rolling hills covered in spring grass, patches of pine and aspen, and in the distance, the silhouette of mountains. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made her heart beat faster. "The land here is quite different from Massachusetts." Quinn glanced at her. "Too different?" "No," Rose said thoughtfully, "just different. There's a vastness to it, like anything might be possible." Something in Quinn's expression softened. "That's why most of us came west, for the possibilities." "Is that why you came?" Rose asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Forgive me, that's none of my business." "Nothing to forgive." Quinn was silent for a moment, then said, "I needed a fresh start. Wyoming Territory seemed as good a place as any to find one." Before Rose could respond, Quinn pointed ahead. "There it is, Peterson Ranch." Rose followed his gesture and caught her breath. Nestled in a wide valley, with a creek winding through it and mountains rising in the background, sat a collection of buildings centered around a large two-story log house. Cattle dotted the hillsides, and several horses grazed in a fenced pasture near the barn. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Quinn's expression showed a flicker of pride. Thomas built it all from scratch, started with nothing but a one-room cabin and 50 head of cattle. They approached a wooden arch spanning the road with Peterson Ranch burned into the crossbeam. As they passed beneath it, Rose felt a strange sense of crossing a threshold into a new chapter of her life. The ranch yard was a hub of activity. Two men were repairing a corral fence while another led a horse from the barn. All three stopped to watch as Quinn drove the wagon up to the main house. "That's Hank and Bill at the corral," Quinn said, nodding toward two weather-beaten men in their 40s. "Good with cattle, better with whiskey. The younger one is Jesse, best horseman in 3 counties. The men touched their hats in greeting as Quinn helped Rose down from the wagon. She nodded politely in return, aware of their curious stares. "This is Miss Whitfield," Quinn announced. "She'll be keeping the books and running the house until Mr. Peterson's nephew arrives. I expect you to show her the same respect you'd show me." There was something in his tone, a quiet authority that seemed to come naturally to him. The men murmured acknowledgments, and Rose had the distinct impression that Quinn Prescott's word was law on the Peterson ranch. Quinn carried her trunk into the house, with Rose following. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with a large central room dominated by a stone fireplace. The furnishings were solid and masculine, heavy oak tables, leather chairs, a desk piled with papers in one corner. Gun racks and mounted antlers adorned the walls. "This is the main room," Quinn said. "Dining table there, Thomas's desk in the corner, kitchen's through there." He nodded toward a doorway from which delicious smells were emanating. A small, wiry man with an impressive white mustache appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping his hands on an apron. "This her, then?" he asked, looking Rose up and down with frank curiosity. "Miss Whitfield, this is Cookie," Quinn said. "Don't let the name fool you. He's the best camp cook this side of the Mississippi." Cookie snorted. "Flattery won't get you extra pie, boss," he nodded to Rose. "Welcome, miss." "Sorry about Thomas. He was a good man." "Thank you," Rose said. "Something smells wonderful," Cookie preened slightly. "Venison stew. Figured we should have something special, you being new and all." Quinn led Rose upstairs to a bedroom at the back of the house. It was simply furnished but clean, with a bed, dresser, washstand, and a window overlooking the creek and mountains beyond. "This was to be yours anyway," Quinn said, setting down her trunk. "Thomas had it prepared for when you arrived." Rose ran her hand over the patchwork quilt covering the bed. "He went to such trouble." "He was looking forward to your coming," Quinn said quietly. "Talked of little else these past months." Rose felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected grief for the man she'd never meet. "I wish I could have known him." Quinn watched her for a moment, then cleared his throat. "I'll let you get settled. Dinner's at 6. Thomas's office is downstairs if you'd like to look at the ledgers beforehand." Left alone, Rose unpacked her few belongings, arranging them carefully in the dresser drawers. The room was larger than her cramped quarters in Boston, and the view from the window was breathtaking. Despite the strange circumstances that had brought her here, she felt an unexpected sense of rightness. At precisely 6 o'clock, Rose made her way downstairs. The ranch hands were already seated at the long dining table with Quinn at the head. Cookie was placing bowls of stew and baskets of bread on the table. Conversation stopped when Rose entered. "Miss Whitfield," Quinn said, standing. The other men scrambled to their feet, looking awkward and uncomfortable in their politeness. "Please join us." The only empty chair was to Quinn's right. Rose took it, nodding thanks as Cookie placed a steaming bowl before her. "I've said grace already," Cookie informed her. "No sense letting good food get cold." The meal proceeded in relative silence at first, the men clearly unsure how to behave with a woman at the table. Rose decided to take matters into her own hands. "I've looked at the ledgers briefly, Mr. Prescott," she said. "They seem rather haphazard." Quinn paused with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Thomas had his own system. Indeed, one that apparently involved stuffing receipts between pages and making notations in at least 3 different places. A snicker came from down the table. Quinn shot the offender, the young horseman, Jesse, a warning look. "Can you make sense of them?" Quinn asked Rose. "Given time, yes, but I'd like to implement a more organized system going forward." Quinn considered this, then nodded. "Do what you think best." "I'm more concerned with cattle than columns of figures." "Ain't that the truth?" Hank muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Boss here can spot a sick calf at 500 yards but wouldn't know a profit margin from a hole in the ground." Quinn's lips twitched. "That's why Miss Whitfield is here, Hank, so I don't have to." The tension broken, conversation flowed more easily. Rose learned that a spring cattle drive was planned for the following week, that the creek had nearly flooded during the recent rains, and that Jesse had broken his arm last winter trying to ride an unbroken Mustang on a bet. By the time Cookie served apple pie for dessert, Rose had formed clear impressions of each man. Hank and Bill were indeed rough but good-natured. Jesse was barely 20, eager to impress, and clearly saw Quinn as something of a hero. The fourth hand, a quiet man called Mac, said little but watched everything with intelligent eyes, and Quinn Prescott was undeniably the heart of the operation. The men looked to him naturally, respected his judgment, and seemed genuinely loyal. Not once did he raise his voice or issue direct orders, yet his authority was unquestioned. After dinner, when the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and Cookie was cleaning up in the kitchen, Quinn invited Rose to join him by the fire. "What do you think so far?" he asked, settling into a leather armchair. The firelight played across his features, softening them. I think I can be useful here, Rose said honestly. The books are a mess, but nothing I can't sort out, and the men seem decent. Quinn nodded. They are. Rough around the edges, but good men at heart. He studied her for a moment. You're not what I expected. Oh, and what did you expect? Someone more delicate, I suppose. Eastern ladies tend to wilt out here. Rose smiled slightly. I may be from Boston, Mr. Prescott, but I'm hardly delicate. My father died when I was 16, and my mother followed 2 years later. I've been supporting myself ever since. Quinn, he corrected. If we're going to be working together, you might as well use my name. Quinn, then, Rose agreed. And you can call me Rose, as I suggested yesterday. He nodded, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Why did you answer Thomas's advertisement, Rose, if you don't mind my asking? Rose considered the question. For a new beginning, I suppose. Teaching was respectable work, but she hesitated. There were limited prospects for a woman alone in Boston, and Mr. Peterson's letters, though brief, spoke of a man of integrity. I believed I could build a good life with such a person, even if it wasn't a love match. And now? Quinn asked softly, what do you hope for now? Time, Rose said simply. Time to decide what comes next. This position gives me that, at least. Quinn was silent for a moment. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. The ranch needs someone like you. The way he said it, someone like you, not just anyone, made something warm unfurl in Rose's chest. Thank you. I'm glad to be here too. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom later, Rose reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She had come west to marry one man and now found herself working for another. Yet somehow it felt right. As if the path she now walked, unexpected though it was, might lead somewhere worth going. The next week passed in a flurry of activity as Rose established herself at Peterson Ranch. The ledgers were indeed a disaster, but she threw herself into organizing them with the same determination that had sustained her through difficult years in Boston. By the end of the week, she had created a coherent system for tracking expenses and income, sorted through months of receipts, and identified several areas where the ranch was losing money. Quinn was impressed. You've made more sense of Thomas's bookkeeping in a week than I managed in months, he told her as they sat in the office one evening, reviewing her work. It just takes a systematic approach, Rose said, though his approval pleased her more than she cared to admit. The real issue is that you're paying too much for feed. If you contracted directly with the mill in Riverton instead of going through the general store in Clearwater, you could save nearly 20%. Quinn looked thoughtful. Thomas always said loyalty to local merchants was important, but 20%, he nodded. Make the arrangements. We can't afford sentiment with the price of beef down this year. Rose made a note in the ledger. I'll draft a letter tomorrow. And I've been thinking about the broken fence in the south pasture, she caught herself. If you repaired it, you could rotate the herd and give the north grazing lands time to recover. Quinn's eyes crinkled at the corners. He corrected. You're part of this operation now, Rose. Your input is valuable. Heat crept into Rose's cheeks at his words. Over the past week, she'd come to admire Quinn Prescott greatly. He worked harder than any man she'd ever known from dawn until well after dark. He treated the hands firmly but fairly, and she'd noticed he always took the most difficult tasks for himself. And if she sometimes found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the way the sun bronzed his skin or how his strong hands moved with surprising gentleness when tending an injured calf. Well, that was her private business. The week also brought changes to the main house. Rose had taken over the kitchen from Cookie, who was all too happy to return to his primary duties, feeding the hands. She discovered a small vegetable garden behind the house that had been neglected since Thomas fell ill, and spent several afternoons clearing weeds and planting seeds she found in the storage shed. Thomas's wife started that garden, Quinn told her one evening as he found her working there. He never had the heart to let it go completely, but none of us knows the first thing about growing vegetables. Rose sat back on her heels, pushing a stray curl from her forehead. Well, I don't claim to be an expert gardener, but my mother kept a small plot behind our house in Boston. I think I can manage tomatoes and beans at least. Quinn knelt beside her, examining her work. "Looks good to me." His shoulder brushed hers, and Rose was acutely aware of his closeness, the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him. "The soil is rich here," she said, focusing on the turned earth before her. "Better than what we had in Boston." "Wyoming's good country," Quinn agreed. "Hard sometimes, but good." He reached out, his hand covering hers briefly as he showed her how deep to plant a particular seed. "Like this. The old-timers say plant it with the full moon, and it'll grow strong." The casual touch sent warmth spreading up Rose's arm. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak for a moment. When she looked up, Quinn was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I should check on the herd," he said abruptly, standing. "Dinner at 6? "Yes," Rose managed. "I'm trying a new recipe, chicken and dumplings." Quinn's smile returned, looking forward to it. As he walked away, Rose remained kneeling in the garden, her hand still tingling where his had touched it. This was dangerous territory, she knew. Quinn Prescott was her employer, nothing more. Whatever attraction she felt was surely one-sided, and indulging such feelings could only lead to complications. And yet, as she returned to her planting, Rose couldn't help wondering what it might be like if circumstances were different. If she had come west to marry a man like Quinn rather than Thomas Peterson. The evening of the spring cattle drive arrived with a flurry of activity. The hands were to leave at dawn, taking 500 head to market in Cheyenne. They would be gone for nearly 2 weeks, leaving only Quinn, Rose, and Cookie at the ranch. Rose had prepared a special meal: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, with apple pie for dessert. The hands were in high spirits, joking and telling stories around the table. "Miss Whitfield," Jessie called from down the table, "you should see Quinn when he gets going on a cattle drive. Man can outride and outwork men half his age." Quinn shook his head, looking embarrassed. "Pay no attention, Rose. Jessie thinks every cattle drive is some kind of dime novel adventure." "Last spring," Hank chimed in, "we had a stampede and a thunderstorm. Thought we'd lose half the herd and maybe some men too, but Quinn rides straight into it, cool as you please, and turns the lead steer like it was nothing." Rose looked at Quinn with new appreciation. "That sounds incredibly dangerous," Quinn shrugged. "Part of the job." "Part of being the best damn foreman in the territory, you mean," Bill said, raising his coffee cup in salute. After dinner, as the hands prepared their gear for the morning departure, Quinn beckoned Rose to join him on the porch. The spring evening was mild, with a half-moon rising over the mountains. "I've been meaning to talk to you about the drive," Quinn said. "I usually go with the men, but with Thomas gone," he hesitated. "Someone needs to stay and look after the ranch. I thought I'd stay behind this time, send Hank to lead the men. He's experienced enough." Rose studied him in the fading light. "But you're concerned about it," Quinn sighed. "Hank's a good man with cattle, but he's not the most level-headed when it comes to negotiating prices, and there's been trouble with rustlers in the territory this spring." "Then you should go," Rose said firmly. "Cookie and I can manage here for 2 weeks." "It's not proper leaving you alone with just Cookie for company. People will talk." Rose smiled wryly. "People always talk, Quinn, but Cookie must be 60 if he's a day, and my reputation isn't worth risking the ranch's prosperity." When Quinn still looked uncertain, she added, "Besides, I'm not some delicate flower, remember? I can handle a shotgun if necessary." Quinn's eyebrows rose. "Can you now? My father taught me. We used to hunt pheasant in the countryside outside Boston." Rose lifted her chin. "I'm quite a good shot, actually." A slow smile spread across Quinn's face. "I believe you are at that, Rose Whitfield." He nodded, decision made. "All right, I'll go with the drive, but I want you to keep Thomas's old rifle in your room just in case. And if there's any sign of trouble, fire 3 shots in the air. The Wilsons' place is just over that ridge. They'll hear and come running." "I will," Rose promised. "But there won't be any trouble. Now go finish your preparations. You have an early start tomorrow." Quinn hesitated, then reached out and briefly squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Rose, for understanding the needs of the ranch." The touch was fleeting, but it left Rose's skin tingling long after Quinn had walked away. As she watched him cross the yard to the barn, his tall figure silhouetted against the deepening dusk, Rose acknowledged a truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Quinn Prescott. The realization should have alarmed her. She had known the man barely 2 weeks. He was her employer. And come fall, when Thomas Peterson's nephew arrived to claim the ranch, Quinn might well move on, seeking new opportunities elsewhere. Yet as Rose turned to go back inside, she couldn't summon the appropriate concern. Instead, she felt a sense of rightness, as if her heart had recognized something her mind was only now catching up to. Whatever came next, she would face it honestly, including her growing feelings for the quiet, competent foreman with the kind eyes. The men departed before dawn, driving the cattle east toward Cheyenne. Rose stood on the porch in her wrapper, waving as they rode out. Quinn, mounted on his chestnut stallion, tipped his hat to her before turning to lead the procession down the valley. The ranch seemed eerily quiet after they left. Cookie bustled about the kitchen, muttering to himself as he prepared a simple breakfast for just the two of them. "Gonna be strange without the boys," he said as Rose joined him at the small kitchen table. "Peaceful mind, but strange." "How long have you been with the ranch, Cookie?" Rose asked, accepting a cup of coffee. "Going on 15 years now. Came when Thomas was just starting to build the place up proper." The old man's eyes grew distant. "Fine man, Thomas Peterson, fair and decent even when times were hard." "Did you know his wife?" Rose asked curiously. Cookie nodded. "Margaret, pretty little thing from back east somewhere. Good woman, but this country was hard on her, the winters especially." He shook his head. "When she and the boy died, something in Thomas just closed up. Never thought I'd see him reach out again until he started writing to you." Rose looked down at her coffee. "I wish I could have met him." "He'd have been proud of what you've done here," Cookie said simply. "Getting things organized, bringing life back to the place." Thomas valued that sort of thing. Rose was touched by the old cook's words. "Thank you, Cookie, that means a great deal to me." The next few days fell into a comfortable routine. Rose spent mornings working on the ranch accounts, afternoons tending to the vegetable garden or helping Cookie with preparations for the hand's return. In the evenings, she allowed herself the luxury of reading from Thomas Peterson's surprisingly extensive library. On the 5th day after the men's departure, Rose was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard hoofbeats approaching. For a hopeful moment, she thought Quinn might have returned early, but as the rider came into view, she saw it was a stranger, a well-dressed man in his 30s, riding a fine bay horse. "Hello there," the man called, pulling up his horse. "This is the Peterson place, isn't it?" Rose nodded, instantly wary. "It is. Can I help you?" The man dismounted, removing his hat to reveal sandy hair and a clean-shaven face. "I'm Richard Peterson, Thomas Peterson's nephew, and you must be Miss Whitfield." Rose's heart sank. The nephew wasn't supposed to arrive until fall. His early appearance would change everything, including her position at the ranch, and possibly Quinn's as well. "Mr. Peterson," she said, recovering her composure, "we weren't expecting you until autumn." Richard Peterson smiled, revealing even white teeth. "My business in Chicago concluded earlier than anticipated, so I decided to come see my inheritance sooner rather than later." He glanced around the ranch yard with assessing eyes. "Uncle Thomas always wrote that this was prime cattle country, but I must say it's more impressive than I imagined." There was something in his tone that set Rose's nerves on edge, a calculation that seemed at odds with the warm words. "Your uncle built something remarkable here," she said carefully. "Mr. Prescott and the hands have maintained it well in his absence." "Ah yes, Prescott, the foreman." Peterson's eyes returned to Rose, taking in her simple dress and work-reddened hands. "And you are, what exactly?" "Uncle Thomas's final correspondence mentioned a mail-order bride, but then I received news of his passing." Rose straightened her spine. "I arrived to find Mr. Peterson had passed away. Mr. Prescott offered me a position managing the household and the ranch accounts until your arrival." "I see." Peterson's gaze was coolly appraising. "Well, I'm here now. Perhaps you could show me around. I'd like to see what my late uncle has left me." There was something possessive in the way he said, "left me," that troubled Rose. Thomas Peterson had built this ranch with his own hands, poured his life into it. To hear his nephew speak of it as merely an inheritance seemed disrespectful. Nevertheless, she nodded. Of course. Let me inform Cookie, our cook, of your arrival. He can prepare a proper meal while I show you the property. As Rose led Richard Peterson around the ranch, pointing out the various buildings, pastures, and the creek that provided water year-round, she found herself increasingly unsettled by his questions. He seemed more interested in the value of things than their purpose, more concerned with what could be sold than what should be preserved. And the cattle, how many head? He asked as they stood on a rise overlooking the home pasture. About 500 remain here. Mr. Prescott has taken 500 to market in Cheyenne. Peterson's brow furrowed. Prescott authorized a sale without consulting me. Rose felt a flare of indignation on Quinn's behalf. The spring drive was planned months ago with your uncle's approval. Mr. Prescott has been managing the ranch operations since your uncle fell ill. He's done an excellent job under difficult circumstances. Peterson waved a dismissive hand. I'm sure he has within his limitations, but things will be different now. He turned to Rose, his expression softening into what she supposed was meant to be charm. I can see why my uncle was taken with you, Miss Whitfield. You have a certain, spirited quality that must be refreshing in these parts. Rose took a step back, uncomfortable with his sudden change in demeanor. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Shall we return to the house? Cookie will have dinner ready soon. Over dinner, served in the main dining room, Peterson continued to ask questions about the ranch, its operations, finances, and staff. Rose answered as truthfully as she could while growing increasingly certain that Richard Peterson had very different plans for the ranch than his uncle had. I've been reviewing the ledgers, Rose said, attempting to steer the conversation toward the ranch's positive aspects. With some adjustments to the feed contracts and breeding program, the profit margin could increase significantly next year. Peterson dabbed at his mouth with a napkin. That's assuming I maintain it as a working ranch, Miss Whitfield. Rose froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. I'm sorry. I have interests in Chicago manufacturing concerns, primarily. A cattle ranch in Wyoming, however profitable, doesn't align with my other business ventures. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the coffee in his cup. I'm considering selling, perhaps to one of the larger outfits looking to expand. Rose set down her fork, appetite gone. But your uncle built this ranch from nothing. It was his life's work. And now it's my property, Peterson said simply, to do with as I see fit. The hands, Rose said. They've been loyal to your uncle for years. Some have nowhere else to go, Peterson shrugged. Business is business, Miss Whitfield. Sentiment has no place in it. His eyes narrowed slightly. I would have thought an educated woman such as yourself would understand that. Rose bit back the angry words that threatened to spill out. This man had every legal right to sell the ranch, regardless of how wrong it felt to her. And antagonizing him would only make things worse for everyone, including Quinn. Of course, she said, forcing a neutral tone. I simply meant that your uncle valued the community he built here. Yes, well, Uncle Thomas always was more sentimental than practical. Peterson set down his coffee cup. Now, about your position here. While I'm sure your services have been valuable in my absence, I won't be requiring a bookkeeper or housekeeper going forward. I plan to stay only long enough to arrange the sale. Rose had expected this, but the abrupt dismissal still stung. I understand. When would you like me to leave? Peterson raised an eyebrow. There's no rush. You may remain until Prescott and the others return from Cheyenne. I'd like to speak with him about the potential sale before making any public announcements. That night, alone in her room, Rose paced the floor, troubled by the day's events. The thought of the ranch being sold, the hands dispersed, and Quinn possibly left without a position made her physically ill. In just a few short weeks, the Peterson ranch had come to feel like home more than anywhere had since her parents died. And Quinn. The thought of him returning to find his world upended was unbearable. He had put everything into maintaining Thomas Peterson's legacy, only to have it snatched away by a nephew who saw the ranch as nothing more than a business transaction. Rose sat at the small writing desk by the window, pulling out paper and pen. She needed to warn Quinn to give him time to prepare for what was coming. But as she poised the pen over the paper, she hesitated. Any letter would have to be sent to Cheyenne, and there was no guarantee it would reach Quinn before he started the journey home. And what could she say that wouldn't sound like meddling in affairs that weren't technically her concern? In the end, Rose put the pen down without writing a word. Better to wait for Quinn's return, to tell him in person what had happened and offer whatever support she could. It was the least she could do for the man who had rescued her from that rainy train platform and given her a purpose when she needed it most. The days that followed were uncomfortable at best. Richard Peterson spent most of his time going through his uncle's papers, making notes, and occasionally riding out to survey different parts of the property. He was unfailingly polite to Rose, but in a way that made it clear he saw her as a temporary inconvenience. Cookie was less circumspect in his opinion of the newcomer. "Don't trust a man who won't eat an honest plate of beans," he muttered to Rose as they prepared dinner one evening. "Too fine for ranch food he is, asking for fancy sauces and such." Rose smiled despite her concerns. "He's used to city dining, I suppose, HMPH, city folk." Cookie chopped an onion with unnecessary force. "Thomas came from the city too, but he adapted, became a real rancher, this one." He shook his head. "Just passing through, marking time until he can turn a profit." On the morning of the 12th day with Quinn and the hands expected back within 48 hours, Rose was in the garden when she overheard voices from Thomas Peterson's office. The window was open to catch the spring breeze, and Richard Peterson was speaking to someone Rose couldn't see. "Prime grazing land, water rights secure, and the herd is respectable. I'm thinking 60,000, not a penny less." A deeper voice responded, 50,000 is my ceiling, Peterson. The buildings need work, and I'd have to bring in my own men." "My men are experienced," Peterson countered. "Especially the foreman, Prescott, been running the place for months. You could do worse than keeping him on." Rose's hands stilled in the soil. They were discussing the sale of the ranch and Quinn's future as casually as if they were trading horses. "I've got my own foreman," the unseen man replied. "Don't need another. Especially not one who might have ideas about how things should be run." "Suit yourself, but the price is firm at 60. I've had interest from the Cattlemen's Association as well." Rose had heard enough. She rose from the garden, brushing soil from her skirts, and headed for the barn. She needed space to think, to process the reality that the ranch would indeed be sold, and that Quinn's position, like her own, was in serious jeopardy. The barn was cool and dim after the bright morning sunlight. Rose sank onto a hay bale, allowing herself a moment of raw emotion now that she was alone. In just a few weeks, she had come to love this place, the sweeping vistas, the rhythm of ranch life, the sense of purpose she'd found here, and Quinn. Most of all, Quinn. The realization hit her with startling clarity. It wasn't just the ranch she would miss or the security of employment. It was Quinn Prescott, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the way his rare smiles transformed his face. Somewhere between that rainy train platform and this moment, Rose had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with him. And soon they would both be forced to leave the Peterson ranch, possibly heading in separate directions. The thought was almost unbearable. A sound at the barn door made Rose look up. Richard Peterson stood there, silhouetted against the bright daylight. "Miss Whitfield," he said, stepping inside, "I've been looking for you." Rose stood, hastily composing her features. "Mr. Peterson, I was just taking a moment of rest. The garden needed weeding." Peterson approached, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I've noticed your dedication to my uncle's property. It's commendable, especially for someone with no personal stake in its future." There was something in his tone that made Rose uneasy. "It's my job, Mr. Peterson, nothing more." "Is it?" He moved closer. "I wonder. The hands speak very highly of you in their letters to my uncle, and Prescott's latest report mentioned you several times, quite effusively, I might add." Rose's heart skipped. Quinn had written about her. "Mr. Prescott and I have a professional relationship. He values efficiency, as did your uncle." Peterson was close enough now that Rose could smell his cologne, a sharp, citrusy scent that seemed out of place in the earthy environment of the barn. I'm not a fool, Miss Whitfield. I recognize an opportunity when I see one. Opportunity. Rose took a step back, finding herself against the wooden wall of a horse stall. You're an educated woman, stranded far from home. I'm a businessman in need of someone with your skills. His eyes moved over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Chicago has much more to offer someone like you than this backwater ranch. As my personal secretary, you would have a comfortable position, respectable lodgings, access to society. Rose stared at him, momentarily speechless. Was he offering her employment or something more improper? Either way, the suggestion felt wrong, somehow tainted by his dismissive attitude toward everything his uncle had built. That's very generous, Mr. Peterson, she said carefully. But I'm not looking to relocate to Chicago. His eyebrows rose. No, and what are your plans then? To follow Prescott to his next position. A woman like you deserves better than the life of a ranch foreman's wife, assuming he even has such intentions. The direct reference to her feelings for Quinn, feelings she had barely acknowledged to herself, made Rose flush with embarrassment and anger. My plans are my own concern, Mr. Peterson. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to. She attempted to step around him, but Peterson placed his hand on the wall beside her, blocking her path. Don't be hasty, Miss Whitfield. My offer is sincere, and frankly, it's the best you're likely to receive out here. A woman alone has limited options, as I'm sure you're aware. I'm not alone, Rose said, lifting her chin. I have friends here, people who respect me. Respect, Peterson laughed softly. Is that what you think Prescott feels for you? My dear, men like him see women like you as either Madonnas or whores, and since you're clearly not the latter. Rose's hand moved before she had time to think, slapping Richard Peterson hard across the face. The sound echoed in the quiet barn. Peterson touched his reddening cheek, his expression darkening. I see I misunderstood your character, Miss Whitfield. A pity. You misunderstood nothing except your right to speak to me that way, Rose said, her voice shaking with fury. Now step aside. For a tense moment, Rose thought he might refuse. But then hoofbeats sounded outside, approaching rapidly. Peterson's eyes flicked toward the barn door and he stepped back, adjusting his jacket. We'll continue this discussion another time, he said coldly. When you've had a chance to consider the realities of your situation. He strode from the barn, leaving Rose trembling with a mixture of anger and relief. She waited until she was certain he had gone before following, emerging into the sunlight to find Cookie talking to a young rider on a lathered horse. Rose, Cookie called, waving her over. News from town. The boys are on their way back, should be here by nightfall. Got a good price for the herd too, according to this young fella. Rose's heart leapt. Quinn was coming home a day earlier than expected. Whatever came next, at least she would see him again, would have a chance to warn him about Richard Peterson's plans. That's wonderful news, she said, forcing a smile despite her still shaking hands. We should prepare a special dinner to welcome them back. As Cookie enthusiastically discussed menu options, Rose glanced toward the main house where Richard Peterson now stood on the porch, watching her. His expression was calculating, almost predatory, and Rose knew with sudden certainty that the next 24 hours would change everything for the ranch, for Quinn, and for herself. The sun was setting when Rose heard them, the distant sound of cattle lowing and men calling to each other as they approached the ranch. She hurried onto the porch, shading her eyes against the golden light of dusk. They came into view like a scene from a painting, dust rising around the remaining cattle as the hands guided them toward the home pasture, their figures silhouetted against the crimson sky. And riding at the front, tall and straight in the saddle, was Quinn. Rose's heart quickened at the sight of him. Even at a distance, she could see the weariness in the set of his shoulders, the way he leaned slightly forward as if the only thing keeping him upright was sheer determination. 2 weeks on the trail would exhaust any man, but Quinn had likely taken the hardest tasks for himself, as always. She wanted to run to meet him, to warn him immediately about Richard Peterson's presence and plans. But propriety and the need to avoid raising Peterson's suspicions further kept her on the porch, her hands clasped tightly before her. Richard Peterson emerged from the house, coming to stand beside her. "So that's the famous Quinn Prescott," he remarked, his voice carrying a note of dismissive appraisal. "Doesn't look like much from here." Rose bit back a sharp retort. "Mr. Prescott is one of the most respected foremen in the territory," she said instead, keeping her tone neutral. "Your uncle trusted him implicitly." Peterson made a noncommittal sound. "We'll see if he lives up to his reputation." The men reached the ranch yard, dismounting wearily from their horses. Quinn handed his reins to Jesse, saying something that made the younger man nod before leading the horses toward the barn. Then Quinn looked toward the house, his eyes finding Rose instantly. Even from this distance, Rose could see the moment of recognition, the slight softening of his features as their gazes met. He started toward the porch, removing his hat and running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Miss Whitfield," he called as he approached, "everything all right here?" Before Rose could answer, Richard Peterson stepped forward. "You must be Prescott. I'm Richard Peterson, Thomas Peterson's nephew and heir." Quinn stopped short, surprise evident in his expression before he masked it. "Mr. Peterson, we weren't expecting you until fall, so I've been told." Peterson extended his hand, which Quinn shook after a brief hesitation. "Circumstances allowed me to arrive earlier. Fortunate timing, as it happens. I'm eager to hear about the cattle drive and the state of my uncle's affairs." Quinn's eyes flickered briefly to Rose, a question in them that she couldn't answer with Peterson standing there. "Of course. After the men are settled and the cattle secured, I'd be happy to provide a full report." "Excellent. Miss Whitfield and Cookie have prepared quite a homecoming meal, I'm told. We can discuss business afterward." Peterson's tone was friendly enough, but there was an undercurrent of authority that clearly established who was now in charge. Quinn nodded once, his expression giving nothing away. "I'll see to the men, then join you for dinner." As he turned away, Rose fought the urge to call him back, to warn him privately about what was coming, but Peterson's presence made that impossible. She would have to find another moment before Quinn walked unprepared into what would surely be a difficult conversation. Dinner was a strained affair, despite Cookie's best efforts with the food. The hands, normally boisterous after a successful drive, were subdued in Richard Peterson's presence. Quinn, seated at Peterson's right with Rose across from him, spoke little, answering direct questions about the drive and the cattle prices but volunteering nothing more. Only when dessert was served, Cookie's special apple pie, did Peterson broach the subject that hung unspoken over the table. "I imagine you're all wondering about the future of the ranch," he said, looking around at the assembled men. "My uncle's death was unexpected and his affairs require careful consideration." Quinn set down his fork, his eyes watchful. "Your uncle built something special here, Mr. Peterson." "We've all been honored to be part of it." Peterson smiled thinly. "Yes, well, sentiment aside, a ranch this size represents a significant investment, one that requires careful management." "The ranch is profitable," Quinn said, his voice steady, "more so each year." "I'd be happy to show you the ledgers Miss Whitfield has organized." "Miss Whitfield has been most helpful in that regard," Peterson agreed, with a glance toward Rose that made her skin crawl. "But profitability is only one consideration. There's also the question of alignment with my other business interests." Rose saw understanding dawn in Quinn's eyes, followed by a flash of something that might have been anger before his expression settled into careful neutrality. "I see. Nothing has been decided yet," Peterson continued. "But I've had some interest from potential buyers. The Cattlemen's Association, for one, and James Harrington from the Double H spread to the north." A murmur ran through the hands. The Double H was known for its aggressive expansion and for replacing local workers with cheaper labor brought in from outside the territory. "Harrington would break up the herd," Hank said, his weathered face creased with concern. "He's only after the water rights and the southern grazing lands." "That's business," Peterson said dismissively. "But as I said, nothing has been decided. I'll be considering all options in the coming weeks." The conversation effectively killed any remaining festivity. As soon as it was polite to do so, the hands excused themselves, filing out to the bunkhouse with troubled expressions. Quinn remained, his posture tense as Peterson invited him to the study for a private word. Rose began clearing the table, her mind racing. She needed to speak with Quinn before he left, to warn him about Peterson's true intentions and his inappropriate behavior earlier that day. But Peterson seemed determined to keep Quinn to himself. As she carried dishes to the kitchen, Rose overheard Peterson's voice from the study. $60,000 is a fair price for the entire operation, livestock included. Harrington is prepared to offer $55,000, but I believe I can persuade him to meet my terms. Quinn's response was too low to make out, but his tone sounded controlled, careful. Rose set down the dishes and moved closer to the partially open door. Loyal to your uncle, Quinn was saying, but these men have families, roots in the community. Selling to Harrington would destroy what Thomas spent decades building. Sentimentality is a luxury, Prescott. Business requires clear-eyed assessment of value. Peterson's voice hardened. The decision is mine to make, not yours. Of course, Quinn replied, his tone flat. Is there anything else you require this evening, Mr. Peterson? No, that will be all. We'll continue our discussion tomorrow. I'd like a full tour of the property, particularly the northern section near the foothills. I understand there might be mining potential there. As you wish. Rose quickly moved away from the door as Quinn's footsteps approached. She busied herself with the dishes, her heart pounding. The sale was further along than she'd feared, and Quinn was clearly being excluded from any real input. Quinn emerged from the study, his face a mask of controlled emotion. When he saw Rose, he hesitated, then approached the kitchen doorway. Rose, he said quietly, got a minute? She nodded, drying her hands on a dish towel. Of course. Quinn glanced toward the study, then jerked his head toward the back door. Outside, they stepped onto the back porch, the night air cool after the warmth of the kitchen. Stars blanketed the Wyoming sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. You knew, Quinn said without preamble, about his plans to sell. Rose nodded. He arrived the day after you left. It became clear almost immediately. She hesitated, then added, I'm sorry, Quinn. I wanted to warn you, but there was no way to get word to you on the trail. Quinn sighed, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than when he'd left. Not your fault. I suspected something like this might happen when Thomas died. His nephew never showed any interest in ranching when Thomas was alive. It's wrong, Rose said, unable to keep the passion from her voice. This ranch is more than just land and cattle. It's people's lives, their homes. It's a community. Quinn looked at her, something softening in his expression. That's exactly what Thomas used to say. He shook his head. But legally, Peterson has every right to sell. We have no say in it. There must be something we can do, Rose insisted. Surely Thomas wouldn't have wanted his life's work dismantled and sold off in pieces. Quinn was quiet for a moment, looking out at the star-filled sky. Thomas did mention once that he had a will drawn up in Cheyenne years ago after his wife and son died. But no one's seen it since, and Peterson has the legal claim as next of kin. A will, Rose straightened. Did he ever mention what was in it? No details, just that he'd taken care of things. Quinn turned to face her fully, his eyes searching her face. How have you been, really? Peterson hasn't been inappropriate, Rose hesitated. The barn incident came to mind, but mentioning it now would only add to Quinn's burdens when he already looked ready to collapse from exhaustion. I'm fine, she said instead, just concerned about everyone's future, the hands, Cookie, you. Quinn's expression softened further. Me, this ranch is your home too, Rose said simply. You've put everything into it since Thomas fell ill. It's not right that it should be taken away. Quinn was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, he said, Home isn't always a place, Rose. The words hung between them, laden with meaning Rose was afraid to interpret. Before she could respond, the back door opened, spilling lamplight onto the porch. Richard Peterson stood there, his silhouette sharp against the light. Ah, there you are, Prescott. I've been looking for you. His eyes moved between Quinn and Rose, a calculating gleam in them. I hope I'm not interrupting anything personal. Not at all, Quinn said, his voice suddenly professional again. Miss Whitfield and I were discussing ranch business, of course. Peterson's tone made it clear he didn't believe that for a second. Well, don't let me interrupt. I'm retiring for the night. We'll begin our tour at dawn, Prescott. Yes, sir, Quinn replied, the formality sounding strange from him. After Peterson had gone, a heavy silence fell between Quinn and Rose. Finally, Quinn sighed. I should get some rest too. It's been a long trail. Of course, Rose said, disappointment washing over her. There was so much more she wanted to say, but this wasn't the time. Good night, Quinn. He hesitated, then reached out, his hand briefly touching hers. It's good to be back, Rose. Whatever happens with the ranch, I'm glad you're here. The simple touch, the quiet words, meant more to Rose than any flowery declaration might have. As Quinn walked away toward his quarters in the small cabin behind the main house, Rose remained on the porch, her hand still warm where his had been. Whatever came next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to stand by and watch as Richard Peterson destroyed everything Thomas had built and everything Quinn loved. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Rose woke early, determined to find a moment alone with Quinn before he left with Peterson for the property tour. But when she went downstairs, she found only Cookie in the kitchen, grumbling as he prepared breakfast. They've already gone, he informed her. Peterson insisted on starting at first light, didn't even take coffee, just rode out with Quinn toward the north pasture. Rose's heart sank. Did Quinn say anything before they left about yesterday's conversation? Cookie shook his head. Not a word. But I know that look he gets when he's planning something. Seen it before cattle drives and when we had that trouble with rustlers last year. The old cook eyed Rose speculatively. You two seem to have plenty to talk about last night. Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. We were discussing the ranch situation. Cookie turned back to the stove. Well, whatever's brewing between you two, best sort it out quick. Word is Peterson aims to finalize a sale within the week. A week, Rose stared at him. That's far too soon for a proper assessment and negotiation. Cookie shrugged. Man's in a hurry to get back to his fancy life in Chicago, doesn't care what happens to the rest of us. After breakfast, Rose found herself at loose ends. With Quinn and Peterson gone for the day and the hands busy with post-drive tasks, she had little to do beyond her usual household duties. But her mind was too full of worries to focus on mundane chores. Instead, she made her way to Thomas Peterson's office, determined to see if there might be any clue to the existence of the will Quinn had mentioned. If Thomas had indeed left specific instructions about the ranch's future, finding them could change everything. The office was a cluttered space, with bookshelves lining two walls and a massive oak desk dominating the center of the room. Richard Peterson had clearly been through the desk drawers, as papers were stacked haphazardly on the surface. But the bookshelves looked untouched, their contents gathering dust. Rose ran her fingers along the spines of ledgers, law books, and agricultural manuals. Thomas Peterson had been a learned man, it seemed. Among the practical texts were volumes of poetry, philosophy, and classic literature, the kind of reading one might not expect from a Wyoming cattle rancher. As she examined the shelves, Rose noticed that one volume of Shakespeare's collected works was positioned slightly forward of the others. Curious, she pulled it out, finding it heavier than expected. When she opened it, she discovered why. The center had been hollowed out, creating a hiding place that now contained a sealed envelope. With trembling fingers, Rose lifted the envelope. Last Will and Testament of Thomas James Peterson was written across the front in a firm, clear hand. She stared at it, her heart racing. This could be exactly what they needed to prevent the ranch from being sold, to protect Quinn's position and the livelihood of everyone who depended on the Peterson ranch. But as she turned the envelope over, Rose hesitated. Opening it would be a breach of privacy, possibly even illegal. She had no right to read Thomas Peterson's private documents. The proper course would be to turn it over to the authorities, or at least to Richard Peterson as the legal heir. And yet, Rose thought of Quinn's exhausted face as he spoke of the ranch's uncertain future. Of the hands who had faithfully served Thomas Peterson for years. Of Cookie, who had nowhere else to go at his age. And she thought of Thomas himself, who had built this place from nothing, who had been preparing to welcome her as his wife, who had clearly cared deeply about the legacy he would leave behind. With sudden resolve, Rose broke the seal and opened the envelope. The document inside was formal and legal, drawn up by a lawyer in Cheyenne and properly witnessed. Rose skimmed through the legal language, her eyes widening as she reached the key provisions. Thomas Peterson had indeed left specific instructions about the ranch. While a portion of his financial assets would go to his nephew Richard, the ranch itself, the land, buildings, livestock, and equipment was to be held in trust, with Quinn Prescott named as trustee and managing partner. The hands were to be offered the opportunity to buy shares in the operation over time, essentially transforming the ranch into a cooperative venture. There was a personal note at the end, in Thomas's own handwriting, to Quinn Prescott, who has been more a son to me than any man could ask for. Your integrity, work ethic, and vision for the future of this land have given me hope in my darkest hours. I entrust my life's work to your hands, knowing you will honor its purpose and the community we have built together. The Peterson Ranch is your home now. Make it a legacy we can both be proud of. Tears pricked at Rose's eyes as she read these words. Thomas Peterson had recognized in Quinn the same qualities that had drawn her to him: his quiet strength, his unwavering dedication, his fundamental decency. But the will had never been filed or probated. Its existence was unknown to anyone but Thomas himself and now Rose. Without official recognition, Richard Peterson's claim as next of kin would stand. Rose carefully refolded the document, her mind racing. She needed to get this to Quinn immediately. But he and Richard were somewhere on the ranch's vast acreage, not expected back until evening. And if she showed the will to Peterson himself, there was every chance he might destroy it rather than honor his uncle's wishes. As Rose was considering her options, hoofbeats sounded outside. She hurried to the window, relieved to see Quinn riding into the yard alone. He dismounted stiffly, looking more exhausted than ever as he handed his horse to Jessie. Rose tucked the will into her pocket and rushed outside. Quinn. He turned at the sound of her voice, his expression lightening slightly. Rose, everything all right? I need to speak with you, she said urgently. In private, it's important. Quinn glanced around the yard, then nodded toward the barn. Give me 5 minutes. Rose waited impatiently inside the cool dimness of the barn, the document seeming to burn in her pocket. When Quinn entered a few minutes later, she immediately asked, Where's Peterson? At the north boundary with Hank, interested in the mining possibilities up there. Quinn's voice was flat with disapproval. He's talking about selling mineral rights separately from the land, would destroy the grazing potential. Quinn, I found something. Rose pulled the will from her pocket, holding it out to him. In Thomas's office, a book with a hidden compartment. Quinn took the document, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as he scanned its contents. This is, Thomas left the ranch to me and the hands, as a trust, yes, with you as trustee. Rose watched his face, seeing the emotions play across it: shock, gratitude, and something like vindication. It's legal, Quinn, properly witnessed and notarized. Thomas wanted you to carry on his legacy, not Richard Peterson. Quinn read the personal note at the end, his jaw tightening with emotion. For a moment, Rose thought he might break down, but he quickly composed himself, looking up at her with intense blue eyes. Rose, this changes everything. If this is recognized by the court, that's the problem, Rose interrupted. It was never filed or probated. We need to get it to the proper authorities before Peterson can interfere. Quinn nodded, thinking rapidly. Judge Wilson comes through Clearwater every third Thursday for circuit court. That's tomorrow. He folded the will carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket. I'll ride into town first thing in the morning, catch him before court opens. What about Peterson? Rose asked. When he discovers what we've done, let me worry about Peterson, Quinn said, his voice hardening. The important thing is protecting Thomas's legacy and everyone who depends on this ranch. He paused, his expression softening as he looked at her. Including you, Rose. The words hung between them, laden with meaning. Rose felt her heart quicken. Me. Quinn took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, smell the leather and sunshine scent of him. When I rode up to that train station and found you standing there in the rain, I thought you were the bravest woman I'd ever seen. These past weeks, watching you take on every challenge without complaint, putting everyone else's needs before your own. He shook his head, a small smile touching his lips. Thomas chose well when he answered your letter. Rose's throat tightened with emotion. Quinn, I know your agreement was with Thomas, not me, Quinn continued. And I have no right to ask anything of you, but if this will is upheld, if the ranch is secured, would you consider staying, not as an employee, but as... He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the right words. But his eyes, fixed intently on hers, said everything his voice could not. Rose's heart soared. All the feelings she'd been trying to suppress these past weeks, her growing admiration, her deepening affection, her undeniable attraction to this quiet, honorable man came rushing to the surface. As your partner, she suggested softly, in all things, the tension in Quinn's shoulders visibly eased. Yes, he said simply. As my partner, my wife, if you'd have me, Rose smiled, tears of happiness pricking at her eyes. I think I'd like that very much, Quinn Prescott. Quinn's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. I know this isn't how you imagined things would be when you came west, and I'm not Thomas Peterson, no, Rose interrupted, placing her hand over his. You're Quinn Prescott. The man who found me waiting in the rain and said I'd waited long enough. The man I've come to admire more than anyone I've ever known. She took a breath, gathering her courage. The man I've fallen in love with. Quinn's eyes widened slightly at her bold declaration. Then slowly, he leaned forward, giving her every chance to pull away. Rose met him halfway, her eyes fluttering closed as their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and certain, a promise of everything to come. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her cheek. I love you, Rose Whitfield. Have almost from the moment I saw you standing there at that station, refusing to give up hope. A sound at the barn door made them both turn. Richard Peterson stood there, his expression thunderous as he took in their embrace. Well, he said coldly, this explains a great deal. Quinn stepped slightly in front of Rose, protective without being obvious about it. Mr. Peterson, you're back earlier than expected. Clearly, Peterson replied, I see you've been otherwise occupied in my absence. His gaze shifted to Rose, then back to Quinn. I don't know what game you two are playing, but this ranch is my property and I won't have my employees conducting liaisons on my time. Rose felt Quinn tense beside her, but his voice remained controlled. With respect, sir, there's been a development you should know about. Oh. Peterson's eyebrows rose skeptically. And what might that be? Quinn hesitated, then slowly withdrew the document from his pocket. Your uncle left a will, Mr. Peterson. A legal, properly witnessed will that specifies his wishes for the ranch after his death. Peterson's expression shifted from scornful to wary. A will? That's impossible. My lawyers checked thoroughly. There was no will on file. It wasn't filed, Rose explained. Thomas kept it private, hidden in his office, but it's legal and binding. Peterson held out his hand. Let me see it. Quinn didn't move. I think it would be best if we all took this to Judge Wilson tomorrow. Let him determine its validity. I am the legal heir, Peterson snapped. That document belongs to me. Hand it over, Prescott, or I'll have you arrested for theft. The tension in the barn was palpable. Rose could see Quinn calculating his options, weighing the risks of defying Peterson outright against the possibility that Peterson might destroy the will if given the chance. Before either man could act, another figure appeared in the barn doorway, Cookie, his weathered face grim beneath his white mustache. Everything all right in here? The old cook asked, though his sharp eyes took in the scene with clear understanding. Hands are wondering when you'll be joining them for the afternoon count, Quinn. I'll be right there, Quinn said, not taking his eyes off Peterson. Mr. Peterson and I were just discussing some important ranch business. Cookie nodded slowly, figured as much. Oh, and Hank says to tell you the judge is already in town. Came a day early on account of some business in Riverton later this week. Rose felt a surge of hope. If the judge was already in Clearwater, they could resolve this situation immediately, before Peterson had time to interfere. Quinn's expression remained carefully neutral, but Rose saw the same realization in his eyes. Thank you, Cookie. Please tell Hank I'll be out directly. He turned to Peterson. Mr. Peterson, since Judge Wilson is available now, perhaps we should all ride into town immediately and let him examine the will. The sooner this matter is resolved, the sooner you can proceed with your plans, whatever they may be. It was a diplomatic suggestion, offering Peterson the appearance of control while actually advancing their own agenda. For a moment, Rose thought Peterson might refuse. His face flushed with anger, his hands clenching at his sides, but finally he gave a curt nod. Very well. I'm confident any supposed will be revealed as fraudulent or superseded by my legal claim as next of kin. Have the horses saddled immediately. As Peterson strode from the barn, Cookie gave Quinn and Rose a knowing look. Found it, did you? He asked quietly. You knew, Rose gasped. Cookie shrugged. Thomas mentioned once he'd taken care of things, didn't say how, but I figured he wouldn't leave the ranch to that city slicker nephew of his. He nodded toward Quinn. Always knew you were the son he never had in all the ways that matter. Quinn's throat worked as he swallowed hard. Thank you, Cookie, for everything. Don't thank me yet, the old cook warned. Peterson won't give up easy. Man like that, used to getting his way, he'll fight. Let him, Quinn said, his voice quiet but firm. This is worth fighting for. The ride to Clearwater was tense, with Peterson maintaining a frigid silence while Quinn and Rose exchanged occasional glances. Rose was acutely aware of the will, now securely tucked inside Quinn's shirt. Everything depended on that single document, their future, the ranch's legacy, Thomas Peterson's final wishes. Judge Wilson was holding court in the back room of Clearwater's general store, a makeshift arrangement that served when the circuit judge visited the small town. He was a tall, thin man with steel gray hair and piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through pretense. Prescott, he greeted Quinn with a nod of recognition. Been a while. How's the Peterson spread? That's what we've come to discuss, Your Honor, Quinn said respectfully. There's been a development regarding Thomas Peterson's estate. The judge's eyebrows rose as he took in Richard Peterson's expensively tailored suit and Rose's simple dress. I see. Well, let's hear it then. Quinn presented the will, explaining how it had been discovered and the provisions it contained. Judge Wilson examined the document carefully, his expression giving nothing away as he read through the legal language in Thomas's personal note. This appears to be in order, he said finally. Properly witnessed, notarized by Jacob Simmons in Cheyenne. I know him, good man. Signature matches other documents I've seen from Thomas Peterson. He looked up at Richard Peterson. According to this will, Mr. Peterson, your uncle left you his financial holdings and personal effects, but the ranch itself, the land, livestock, and equipment is to be held in trust, with Mr. Prescott as trustee. Peterson's face flushed dark red. This is absurd. I am his only living relative. That will can't possibly be valid. It was never filed, never probated. The lack of filing doesn't invalidate a will, Mr. Peterson, Judge Wilson interrupted calmly. It simply means the probate process must begin now rather than at the time of death. I'll need to verify the witnesses' signatures, of course, but assuming they're authentic, this will stands as Thomas Peterson's legal declaration of his wishes. I'll fight this, Peterson sputtered. I have lawyers in Chicago who will tear that document apart. You're welcome to contest the will, Judge Wilson said, unperturbed. But I should warn you that Wyoming Territory takes a dim view of attempts to overturn the clearly expressed wishes of its citizens, especially respected ranchers like your uncle. And litigation could take years, during which time the estate would remain in limbo. He paused significantly. Or you could accept the financial settlement, which appears quite generous, and allow your uncle's legacy to continue as he intended. Peterson looked from the judge to Quinn to Rose, his expression calculating beneath the anger. Rose could almost see him weighing the costs in time, money, and reputation of a protracted legal battle against the certainty of the financial inheritance. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly. How soon can the financial assets be transferred? Once the will is officially probated, which I can begin tomorrow, Judge Wilson said, the bank accounts and investments could be liquidated within a month. Peterson nodded stiffly. Very well. I'll accept the terms of the will, pending verification of its authenticity, but I'll be staying at the ranch until the financial matters are resolved. Of course, Quinn said smoothly, you're welcome as long as necessary. As they left the judge's office, Rose felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't completely resolved there would be paperwork, formalities, perhaps even further challenges from Peterson. But Thomas Peterson's wishes would be honored. The ranch would remain intact, and Quinn would be its steward, and she would be at his side if she chose to stay. That evening, after a remarkably civil dinner where Richard Peterson announced his intention to return to Chicago as soon as the financial transfers were arranged, Quinn found Rose in the garden. The setting sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and pink, casting a warm glow over the newly turned earth where Rose had been planting. Judge Wilson sent word, Quinn said without preamble. The witnesses have confirmed their signatures. The will is official. Rose smiled, happiness bubbling up inside her. So it's done. The ranch is safe. The ranch is safe, Quinn confirmed, his own smile breaking free, transforming his face. Thomas's legacy will continue just as he wanted. And the hands, cookie. Everyone keeps their position with the opportunity to buy shares in the operation over time, just as Thomas outlined. Quinn reached out, taking her soil-stained hands in his. But there's one position I'm particularly concerned about filling. Rose's heart quickened. Oh. And what position is that, Mr. Prescott? Quinn's eyes crinkled at the corners. Well, Miss Whitfield, a ranch this size needs proper management. A trustee can't do it alone. He needs a partner, someone with a head for figures, a talent for organization, and preferably a fondness for gardening. Rose pretended to consider this. Those seem like very specific requirements. Do you have someone in mind? I do. Quinn's expression turned serious, though his eyes still held warmth. Someone who came west looking for a new beginning and found herself standing in the rain at a train station. Someone brave enough to start over when her plans fell apart. Someone I've come to love more than I ever thought possible. Rose's breath caught in her throat. Quinn. He released her hands, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small, worn velvet box. This was my mother's, he said quietly, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. It's not fancy, but it's all I have to offer, besides my heart and a lifetime of working to make you happy. Rose felt tears well in her eyes as Quinn dropped to one knee before her, there in the garden with the sunset painting them both in golden light. Rose Whitfield, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, will you marry me? Not because it's practical or because it's what's expected, but because I hope you feel for me what I feel for you. Rose didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered, and then louder, yes, Quinn Prescott. I will marry you because I love you, and because there's nowhere else in the world I'd rather be than by your side. Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms. This time their kiss was deeper, filled with the promise of all the days to come, days they would share together as partners, as husband and wife, as the caretakers of Thomas Peterson's legacy. When they finally parted, Quinn kept his arms around her, looking down into her face with an expression of wonder. When I found you at that station, he murmured, I told you you'd waited long enough, but the truth is I was the one waiting for you, though I didn't know it yet. Rose rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Sometimes the best journeys take us to places we never expected to go, she said softly, but end exactly where we're meant to be. As the last light of day faded from the Wyoming sky, Rose and Quinn stood together in the garden, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the land that would be their home, their legacy to build together, day by day, season by season, for all the years to come. 10 years later, the Prescott Ranch was thriving. Under Quinn and Rose's careful management, it had grown to 5,000 acres, with a herd of nearly 2,000 cattle and some of the finest horses in Wyoming territory. The cooperative structure Thomas Peterson had envisioned had become a reality. Hank, Bill, Jesse, and even young hands who had joined later all owned shares in the operation. The main house had expanded to accommodate Quinn and Rose's growing family, 8-year-old Thomas, named for the man who had brought them together, and 5-year-old twins Margaret and James, both with their father's blue eyes and their mother's determined spirit. On the 10th anniversary of the day Quinn had found Rose waiting in the rain at Clearwater Junction, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard with Cookie's latest batch of puppies. The old cook himself, now well into his 70s but still spry, called from the kitchen that dinner would be ready soon. 10 years, Rose marveled, leaning against her husband's solid shoulder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that train, and sometimes it feels like I've been here my whole life. Quinn's arm tightened around her waist. Any regrets about the path not taken? Rose looked up at him, at the face she had grown to know as well as her own, the laugh lines around his eyes deeper now, a touch of silver at his temples, but still handsome as the day they met. "Not one," she said truthfully. "Every raindrop that fell while I waited on that platform was worth it to end up here with you." Quinn bent to kiss her, a gesture as natural now as breathing, yet still holding the same tenderness as their first embrace in the barn a decade ago. "Mama, Papa, look." Little Thomas called, running toward them with a squirming puppy in his arms. "Cookie says I can keep him. Can I, please?" Quinn laughed, ruffling his son's dark hair. "We'll discuss it after dinner. Put him back with his mother for now." As Thomas raced back to join his siblings, Quinn and Rose exchanged a glance of shared amusement and love. This was the legacy they were building, not just the ranch with its cattle and horses and fertile land, but a family, a community, a home in the truest sense of the word. The rain had long since cleared, the waiting was over, and their journey together continued, one precious day at a time.